Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, dear students. Today, inshallah, we are going to continue our lessons in macroeconomics. We started the last part 4 of our course, with the economic fluctuations. And today, we are going to take chapter 12 about the aggregate demand and applying the ISLM model. In the previous chapter, we assembled the pieces of the ISLM model. As you know, the IS is for investment and saving, LM for liquidity and money. So as a step toward understanding the short-run economic fluctuations, which is the main topic of this part with its 4 chapters, we saw that the IS curve represents the equilibrium in the market for goods and services. That the LM curve represents the equilibrium in the market for real money balances. Okay, and that the IS and LM curves together determine the interest rate and the national income in the short run when the price level is fixed. Now we turn our attention to applying the ISLM model to analyze some issues. So in this chapter, we will learn how to use the ISLM model that we learned how to build it in the previous chapter. We will see how to use it to analyze effects of the shocks, the economy, and the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. Also, we'll learn how to derive the aggregate demand curve from the ISLM model. We will see also several theories about what caused the Great Depression. So let's begin with the equilibrium in the ISLM model. As you see, you have the interest rate here and the output in the x-axis. The IS curve represents equilibrium in the goods and services market, as we know. Okay. So this is the IS curve, and the LM curve represents the money market equilibrium. So the intersection between the IS and LM curve determines the unique combination of income and interest rate that satisfies equilibrium in both markets. So the policy analysis with the ISLM model. We can use the ISLM model to analyze the effects of fiscal policy, like the government spending, G, or taxes, T, the monetary policy, M, the money supply, and so on. So an increase, let's take an increase if there is an increase in the government purchases, for example. If there is an increase in the government purchasing, the IS curve shifts to right. Okay, because it's related to the goods and services market. So the increase in the government purchases and spending and so on will shift it to the right by the amount of change in the government spending, which will cause the output and income to rise. This area, it's called 1. What will happen then? This raises the money demand. When the government spending increase, so the output increase, the income rise. So this raises the money demand, which will cause the interest rate to rise from R1 to R2, which reduces the investment. So because the interest rate rises, so the investment will fall. So the final increase in the income will be at this point. So the income in this, the output and income will be smaller than the amount of change of the government spending. You can see number 1 here on the graph is larger than number 3. This is if the government spending increase. What about the tax cut? If there's a tax cut, consumers save amount of the tax cut, so the initial post in spending is smaller for the change of tax than for an equal change in government spending. So the IS curve shifts by a smaller amount. And if you get back in the video to the previous graph, you can see that the amount of change in the tax cut will be smaller than the amount of change happening because of the government spending. Then the effects of the interest rate and the output are smaller for the change on taxes than for equal change in government spending in the other example. Okay, this is for the fiscal policy, the government spending and tax. What about the monetary policy? If there's an increase in money supply, you can see here it's related to what? To the LM curve in this case. Okay, so we have LM1 and the interest rate and the output or income. So the change, if the change in money supply is more than 0, and this means that there's increase in money supply, this will shift the LM curve down or downward or to the right, like this, to LM2. Okay, you can see the point of intersection between LM curve and the IS curve changed. So causing this, increasing the money supply will cause the interest rate to fall from R1 to R2. And this increases the investment because the interest rate is full. And when the investment increases, the output and the income will rise, as you can see, from Y1 to Y2. Okay. Now the interaction between the monetary and the fiscal policy, because we are in the same country, in the same economy, there is interaction between monetary policy, the central bank, and fiscal policy, the government, the parliament, and so on. So they are all in the same economy, they affect each other. So monetary and fiscal policy variables like the money supply, the government expenditure, the taxes are exogenous variables. Okay, in the real world, as we said, monetary policy makers may adjust the money supply in response to changes in fiscal policy or in government purchases or tax or vice versa. So such interaction may alter the impact of the original policy to change. For example, if the central bank or the Fed in United States responds to an increase in the government purchases. Suppose that Congress increases the government purchases, and what will the central bank or the Fed respond? We have 3 possibilities. He may hold the money supply constant, or he may hold the interest rate constant, or he may hold the output and the income constant. In each case, the effects of the change in government spending or the increase are different. We can see response 1, which means if the central bank hold the money supply constant when there is an increase in the government aid purchase. If Congress raises the government purchase, the IS curve shifts right. We know this, okay? When the government spend increase, the IS curve shifts to right, from IS1 to IS2. If the central bank holds the money supply constant, in this case, so then the LM curve will not shift, because it shifts if the money supply changes. So the results here, we can see the change in output will move from Y1 to Y2, and the interest rate will rise from R1 to R2. Okay, so this is because the government spending. The second response from the central bank, holding the interest rate constant. In this case, to keep the R constant, the central bank increases the money supply. Why? To shift the LM curve to the right, as you can see here, from LM1 to LM2. So you can see the interest rate was first in R1. You can see this intersection. Then when the government spending increased, it's moved to R2. Then the central bank raised or increased the money supply, so the LM curve shifted to the right, so you can see the interest rate come back again to the same place. Okay, so in this case, you can see the output or the income increased more than the previous case, and the interest rate remains constant. The third response is holding the Y constant. To keep the Y constant, Fed reduces the money supply. Why? To shift the LM curve to the left. The same thing that happened with the interest rate. You can see here. You can see the previous example. It's changed from Y1 to Y2. Now, when the Fed reduces the money supply, so the LM curve shifts to the left. So we have a new point of intersection, Y1. So in this case, there's no change in income, and the interest rate rises from R1 to R3. What about the shocks in the ISLM model? The IS shocks is exogenous changes in the demand for goods and services. Okay. Examples, we have stock market boom or crash. Change in households' wealth will maybe make a shock in the demand of the goods and services. Also, the change in consumption. Okay, change in business or consumer confidence or expectations will change the investment or may cause a change in consumption also. Okay. What about the LM shocks? It is exogenous changes in the demand for money. For example, a wave of credit card fraud increases demand for money. Okay, more ATMs or internet buying and so on reduces money demand. Okay. An exercise to analyze shocks with ISLM model. Use the ISL model to analyze the effects of, I think this is an assignment for you, this example you can do. Use the ISLM model to analyze the effects of a boom in stock market that makes consumers wealthier. What will happen then? They will buy more. There is change in the goods and services market and so on. What will happen with the IS curve and so on? After a wave of credit card fraud, consumers using cash more frequently in transactions. So what will happen to the LM curve. For each shock, use the ISLM diagram to show the effects of the shock on the income and the interest rate, as we saw in the previous examples. Also determine what happens to consumption, investment, and the unemployment rate. Okay, let's take a case study about the US recession of 2001. Remember 2001, the year that there is the terroristic attacks on the United States and so on. So there was such kind of recession at this time. During 2001, 2.1 million people lost their jobs in US as unemployment rose from 3.9% to 5.8%. GDP growth slowed 2.8% compared to 3.9% average annual growth during 1994 to 2000. Okay, the causes was first, stock market decline. Okay, so the consumption decrease, as you can see. Another cause is the 11th of September terroristic attacks. This increased the uncertainty in markets, fall in consumer and business confidence. So it results for lower spending and the IS curve shifted to the left. The third reason is the corporate accounting scandals at the late of 2000. So like Enron and WorldCom and etc. also reduced the stock prices, discouraged investments, and so on. The fiscal policy response at this time, they tried to shift the IS curve to the right. Okay, how? By tax cuts in 2001 and 2003, and spending increases, like in the government spending, like in airline industry bailout, the New York City reconstruction, Afghanistan war, and so on. So this is the main fiscal policies that the government can respond to shift the IS curve to the right by taxes and government spending. Reducing the taxes, so your income will be more enough to buy more goods and services and consume more and so on, so you can refresh the economy. Also the government spending that in the more by infrastructure fields and so on, so the businesses and the companies of airlines or roads or construction and so on can work, so they will raise profits and reduce the unemployment rate. This is the fiscal policy. What about the monetary policy? Also, they can respond to shift the LM curve to right by, for example, the treasury bills and so on. So the instruments that the central banks or the Fed in US policies takes, the news media commonly report that Fed policy changes as interest rate changes, as if the Fed has direct control over market interest rates. In fact, the Fed targets the federal funds rate, the interest rate banks charge one another on overnight loans. So the Fed changes the money supply and shifts the LM curve to achieve its targets. Other short-term rates typically move with the federal funds rates. So why does the Fed target interest rates instead of the money supply in this case? Because first, they are easier to measure than the money supply, and also the Fed might believe that LM shocks are more prevalent than IS shocks. So then if so, then targeting the interest rate stabilizes income better than targeting the money supply. Okay, let's now see the ISLM curve model and the aggregate demand. So far, we have been using the ISLM model to analyze the short run when the price level is assumed fixed. However, a change in price would shift the LM and therefore affect the output and the income. So the aggregate demand curve, which introduced in the previous chapters, captures this relationship between the price and the output and income. As we know, deriving the aggregate demand curve, we have here the relation between the interest rate and income and the negative sloping IS curve, and also the price and the income and the LM curve. And so you can see from this graph, when the prices from P1 to P2, the money balance decrease. Okay, so in this case, the LM curve shifts to left from LMP1 to LMP2. Okay, in this case, you can see also the interest rate rises from R1 to R2. What happens when the interest rate increase? The investments will decrease. When the investment decrease, so the output also and the income will decrease. You can see it again from this graph, shifting the when the price changes, the LM curve change, and the interest rate increase. Okay, so the investment decrease, so the output and income move to the left from Y1 to Y2. So you can see the final result of the aggregate demand and how to derive the aggregate demand curve. The monetary policy and the aggregate demand curve. The Fed can increase the aggregate demand. Now, by increasing the money supply, okay, so in this case, the LM shifts to the right. Okay, what will happen then? The interest rate will decrease. When the interest rate decrease, the investment will increase, and when the investment increase, the Y or the output and the income at each value of price will increase also from Y1 to Y2. So we can see here the change or the shift in the aggregate demand curve. This is the monetary policy. What about the fiscal policy and the aggregate demand curve? You can see here the expansionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy means increasing the government spending and decreasing the taxes. So the expansionary policy of fiscal policy, this increases the aggregate demand. So as we can see, reducing taxes, for example, will increase the consumption. Okay, if your income is 100 and you pay taxes for 20, for example, so if the tax is reduced to be 10 instead of 20, so you will have to consume from your 90 instead of 80, so you will consume more. So in this case, the IS curve shifts to the right, and in this case, the output and the outcome, the output and the income will raise at each value of price. Okay, and the aggregate demand curve shifts. So now the short run and long run effects of an IS shock. You can see here in the long run the Y is fixed, right? So we have the IS curve in the above graph and the aggregate demand curve in the other one, and we have the long run aggregate supply and short run aggregate supply curve and the LM curve. So a negative IS shock will shift the IS and also the aggregate demand curves to the left. then what will happen? Y output will fall, as you can see. Okay, so in the new short-run equilibrium, the Y or the new output will be less than the constant or the output or income in the long run. So over time, the price gradually falls, which causes the short-run aggregate supply to move down. So the money balance to increase, which causes the LM curve to move down. Okay, so this process continues until economy reaches a long-run equilibrium with Y and the long-run Y or the constant Y, as you can see, changes again the intersection point come to this below place. Now let's take an example or case study or for as a conclusion of these two chapters about the Great Depression, which is the most important example about these issues. You can see here the real GNP in the United States at this time and the unemployment rate at this time. It was really a Great Depression, as it's called. The spending hypothesis or the shocks to the IS curve. This asserts that depression was largely due to an exogenous fall in the demand for goods and services, which means a leftward shift on the IS curve. Okay, the evidence for that, the output and interest rates both fell, which is what a leftward IS shift would cause, as we saw. Reasons for IS shift: maybe the stock market crash, which decreased the consumption. Okay, also drop in investment, correction after overbuilding in 1920s, widespread bank failures made it harder to obtain financing for investment, and so on, and contractionary fiscal policy as politicians raised tax rates and cut spending to combat increasing deficits, which is a very contractionary to what we study in our model. This is about the IS curve. A shock in or to the LM curve. This asserts that the depression was largely due to huge fall in the money supply. Okay, the evidence for that, the M1 fell to 25% during these years of the Great Depression, but there's two problems with this hypothesis. As the price fell even more, so the money balance actually rose slightly during these years. Also, nominal interest rates fell, which is the opposite of what a leftward LM shift would cause. So the money hypothesis, again, the effects of the falling prices, asserts that the severity of the depression was due to a huge deflation, as price fell to 25% during these years. So this deflation was probably caused by the fall in the money supply. So perhaps money played an important role after all. But in what ways does a deflation affect the economy? The stabilizing effects of the deflation, when the prices increase, the money supply money balance increase. So this shifts the LM curve to the right and increase the output. Pigo effect, when the prices decrease, so the money balance increase, the consumers' wealth increase, the consumption also increase, and the IS curve shifts to the right, and the income will increase. The destabilizing effects of expected deflation, as the expected deflation decrease, so the interest rate increase for each value of the nominal interest rate. So in this case, the investment will decrease because the investment is a function of the interest rate. Planned expenditure and aggregate demands in this case will increase, so the income and output will decrease. The destabilizing effects of unexpected deflation. We have also the debt deflation theory, as the prices will decrease if unexpected. So this transfers purchasing power from borrowers to lenders. So borrowers spend less, lenders spend more. If the borrower's propensity to spend is larger than lenders, then aggregate spending falls and the IS curve shifts to the left and the income and output will. At the end, why another depression is unlikely to happen or will not happen? Because now policymakers, and as we studied in these two chapters, policymakers or other their advisors now know much more about macroeconomics issues. The central banks knows better than to let the money supply fall so much, especially during a contraction. Fiscal policymakers know better than to raise taxes or cut spending during a contraction. Also, federal deposit insurance makes widespread bank failures very unlikely to happen. Also, the automatic stabilizers make fiscal policy expansionary during an economic downturn. So this was our chapter for today. Let's see the summary of the chapter. The ISLM model, a theory of aggregate demand, exogenous variables, the money supply, government spending and taxes, prices, exogenous in short run, and the income and output in the long run. Endogenous, like the interest rate, Y endogenous in short run, price in the long run. The IS curve is a curve for goods market equilibrium, the LM for money market equilibrium. Second, the aggregate demand curve which shows the relation between price and the ISL curve equilibrium of output. The negative slope because the prices, if the price increases, the money balance decreases, so the interest rate increase and the investment decrease, and also the income and output will decrease. So the expansionary fiscal policy shifts the IS curve to the right, which means the raising the government spending or decreasing taxes, which will raise the income and shift the aggregate demand to the curve to the right. Also, the expansionary monetary policy shifts the LM curve to the right, which raises the income and shifts the aggregate demand curve to the right. Finally, the IS or LM shocks shifts the aggregate demand curve. And this is our main terms in this chapter. See you next lesson, inshallah, and goodbye and good